This is Scone Palace in Perthshire.
Never to be pronounced Scone, or God forbid, Scone.
It's home to some interestingly coloured peacocks, some not so very coloured peacocks, this recreation of Excalibur, and some interesting history.
The thing behind me there is the Moot Hill. For centuries, it was the site of coronation for Scottish kings. Legend has it that the mound was formed by lords who brought earth with them in their boots and deposited it there at the coronations. Apparently what they would do was swear allegiance to the king on their own land and then bring the soil with them. Does sound a wee bit far-fetched. And this, behind me, or the real version of this, is the Stone of Destiny. It's where all those royals sat to be anointed, and it still is.
Later on today, Charles III will be crowned king in Westminster Abbey. He will sit on a coronation chair that dates back more than 700 years.
And underneath, inside, will be the real Stone of Destiny. In 1286, the stone was stolen and taken south to Westminster, but on Christmas Day, 1950, 4 students unleashed a plot to steal it back.
Welcome to Scotland Unplugged, and the complicated history of the Stone of Scone. It's 336 pounds or 150 kilograms of red sandstone.
There are more than a couple of myths and legends attached to it. It's said to have been a pillow that Jacob rested his head on when he saw angels, and that after that it went to Egypt, Sicily, Spain, and eventually Ireland, to the Hill of Tara, where the high kings of Ireland were crowned. Then it was supposedly brought to this country, before it was even a country, by the Scots, when they invaded from Ireland. The first king of Scots, Kenneth MacAlpine, supposedly brought it to the village of Scone, before the palace, etc. That's one version. During the First War of Independence, Edward the Longshanks, expansionist king of England, the greatest military commander of his day, and semi-professional pantomime villain, invaded Scotland. When he left, he took the stone south with him. Or did he?
Edward had the stone built into a coronation chair sometime around 1307, so that the kings of England would forever sit over the symbol of Scottish power. It didn't stop people being crowned there, as you can see from the collection of plaques on the ground. Some very famous names there. But the stone was gone. According to the writer Walter Scott, who never let the truth get in the way of a good story, there is a prophecy that wherever the stone is, a Scottish king would rule. And sure enough, in 1603, following the death of Elizabeth I of England, James VI of Scotland inherited the English crown and became James I of England. Bit of a promotion. Still, the fact it was in London never sat well with a lot of people.
This is the very impressive and very cloistery Glasgow University. And on Christmas Day, 1950, 4 students decided to take matters into their own hands, right the wrongs, repatriate the stone. The 4 students, Ian Hamilton, Gavin Vernon, Kay Matheson and Alan Stewart, were all associated with the Covenant of Scotland,
a pro-devolution group that were keen for not full independence but home rule as part of the UK. The thought of full independence would probably have blown their minds at the time.
If they could get their hands on the stone somehow, bring it back, maybe that would rekindle some sort of sense of national identity and really just start the conversation about the possibilities of devolution. They were young, they were idealistic. What did they have to lose? Apart from their liberty, obviously.
They were probably influenced by the 1944 novel The North Wind of Love by Compton Mackenzie. That involved a similar plot although in the book, the main character doesn't actually go through with it.
Just before Christmas 1950, they headed for London, the big smoke, that London, the hub of all national power. They went in a couple of Ford Anglias, you know, the kind of crazy little baby blue car that you see in Harry Potter. Those.
They met in a Lions Corner house, just for the full 1950s effect, and regrouped, then headed to Westminster Abbey.
Their original plan was to hide somewhere when the Abbey closed for the night, then come out of hiding, open the doors, and hot-foot it with the stone.
Ian Hamilton hid under a trolley, but he was spotted by a night watchman.
The guard unceremoniously sent him on his way. Back to the drawing board.
The next day, Alan Stewart and Gavin Vernon went back to keep a close eye on the watchman's shift. That night, along with Ian Hamilton, they walked into a works yard at the back of Poets' Corner and broke in. It was a bit of a lo-fi approach. Basically, they crowbarred their way in the back door. Kay Matheson later said you could have heard the racket halfway across London. They entered the area of the Abbey that contained Longshanks' tomb and his coronation chair.
Once they'd actually got to the chair, getting the stone out proved a bit more problematic.
The stone hit the floor and broke into two pieces. What they didn't know was that in 1914, some suffragettes had set off a bomb next to the chair and blown off a corner. The stone was obviously inside and cracked in the process. Just nobody had looked inside to check. Now, the students were panicking.
Obviously, £336 is quite a lot of weight, so they were trying to kind of haul that out of the Abbey as best they could.
They dragged the bigger bit of stone down the steps, using Ian Hamilton's coat. Then he took the smaller piece to one of the waiting Pottermobiles and jumped into the passenger seat. Kay Matheson was driving, but noticed a policeman in the gaslight looking right at them.
They needed something to distract.
Needed to look like they were up to something dodgy, but nothing overly dodgy.
So, they pretended to do what young people have been doing in cars ever since Mr. Mercedes and Mr. Benz got together to declare war on the horse.
Which seemed to convince the copper, who stopped to share a cigarette and a joke, all of which sounds a wee bit weird. After that, they made a sharp exit. Hamilton doubled back to pick up the other stone and put it in the boot of the second car. As he drove out along the old Kent Road, he met the other two and picked them up. But the springs on the cars weren't up to it, so Vernon had to be kicked out and sent to Rugby and then home by train. Hamilton and Stewart drove to Kent and hid the big bit of stone in a field. Matheson left the other car with the small, although probably not that small, bit of stone with a friend in the Midlands, then hightailed it back north of the border as well. Things kind of kicked off at that point. The authorities closed the border between the two countries for the first time in 400 years, and a massive hunt was launched for the stone. A fortnight later, when the heat had died down, they went south again and recovered the stone, then brought it back to Glasgow, where they had a stonemason, Bailey Robert Gray, mend it with a metal rod. The story goes that he placed a piece of paper inside at the same time with a message, although nobody knows what that message was. After a couple of months, the gang felt they'd made their point. The police received a tip-off to say the stone had been placed on the high altar at Arbroath Cathedral, the place where the Declaration of Arbroath, the document declaring Scotland's independence, was signed in 1320. All of the conspirators were interviewed by the police, and everyone but Hamilton later confessed. But the authorities decided not to take any further action because there was way too much chance of it becoming politicised. In 1996, the stone was finally returned to Scotland and Edinburgh Castle, where it now sits alongside the honours of Scotland, the Crown Jewels. After a consultation in 2020, it was agreed that the stone will eventually return to a purpose-built centre in Perth, near Scone itself. It's not in Edinburgh just now though. This weekend, it's in London. That's where it is. Where did it actually come from? Ireland, Spain, Egypt, the Holy Land? Well, the thing is, it's made of a very particular type of red sandstone. A kind of red sandstone that's only really found in the Perth, Dundee area. So, yeah. Awkward. However, that assumes that the stone Edward took south was the actual one. In 1819, a letter was sent to the Morning Chronicle telling the story of some workmen in Macbeth's castle. They were working on something, and the floor gave way beneath them, revealing a vault that contained a semi-metallic or meteoric stone with an engraving that mentioned the legend of Jacob. The stone was apparently shipped to London for inspection and never heard of again. Maybe the truth's still out there.
Sounds legit.
In 1997, 290 years after the original Scottish Parliament was dissolved, the people of Scotland voted for devolution. In 1999, the Scottish Parliament sat again for the first time since 1707. The debate on full independence rages on.